Welcome to Indications and Warnings, everyone, with Chuck Farrer, co-produced by Alan Brewer. Chuck and I are recording this episode of Indications and Warnings on October 29, 2024. It is day 979 of Russia's genocidal invasion of Ukraine. Chuck and I are going to cover the entire zero line in this show as long as it takes. So maybe it'll be 60 minutes, maybe it'll be a little longer than 60 minutes, but we will cover the zero line from Kursk to Kherson. And there are a lot of hotspots. I think the best way to introduce this show, Chuck, is to talk about the massive Russian casualties over the last few days. 1,680 just yesterday, the fourth highest day of casualties for Russian forces in this war.
Yeah, before the show, you and I were going through the contact reports, which were very numerous, and especially when you have them plotted on a very large scale map. That's the easiest way to see the density of the Russian attacks. When you are attacking a prepared defensive position, your casualties are always going to be high. And I don't know off the top of my head what the number of contact points were, but I'm pretty sure they were in excess of 30 or 40 different points at which Russia had tried to achieve some tactical objective. They did make some progress. We'll talk about that in the southeastern areas, but these movements are undertaken at great cost. And again, as the tail of the tape shows, as it so often does, these attacks are carried out perpendicular to the zero line in column, meaning they are approaching like this and attacking a line that's like this. This means if you're up here, all your guns are brought to bear on a force in column. And in one of these attacks, they lost 20 armored vehicles in about 40 minutes. So it's extremely costly. And the manner in which these attacks break down, inevitably, when the vehicles are stopped, the assaulting force turns and runs away. The attack does not continue.
And the vehicle losses on the Russian side have been staggering over the last few days. Their infantry armored vehicles especially are taking big hits on the battlefield everywhere. Not so many tanks as earlier in the war. It's the Russian BMP, their armored infantry fighting vehicle. They are just being scorched.
Well, they have a problem with that particular vehicle, and it sort of is the embodiment of everything that is wrong with Russian combat vehicle design. The BMPs have a circular carousel magazine to feed their main gun, which is inside the crew compartment. So it's not firewalled, there's no brake, there's no fire brake, there's no sliding door, there's no separate ammunition compartment. The vehicle operators are sitting right on top of it. That isn't good. The older BMPs can be pierced by a standard NATO rifle round. Will go right into the vehicle. A 50 caliber round will go through both sides of the vehicle. So basically, the BMP is just about as armored as your Hyundai minivan. It just isn't that good. I have been inside these vehicles. The troop compartment is extraordinarily cramped. It has bucket seats instead of bench seats. So once you're in your seat, it's very difficult to get out. The rear doors of these vehicles are not only hard to manipulate, they are literally hollow and they are filled with fuel. So this is you talk about the Edsel of war wagons, this is it. And you see soldiers riding on top of the vehicles, not in them, on top, because it's safer on top than inside.
Yeah, easier for them to run away.
And easy, and you get a head start that way. Exactly.
Yeah. The Russians are approaching 700,000 casualties now in the course of this war. They're right around 690,000 killed, wounded, taken prisoner, or simply missing in action. This is an incredible loss of life for Russia, which will continue. You know, if we, a year from now, Chuck, are reporting about this war, and I think we will be, Russia will have lost more than 1 million of its soldiers, which to me is staggering.
Well, and there are economic and sociological and nationwide consequences of that. So you lose 1 million men of military age. These are your carpenters, your mechanics, your factory workers, your lawyers, your doctors, your IT specialists, your breadwinners, your head of families. It's going to have a very, very detrimental effect on the Russian economy, and it already is. And Putin is aware of these consequences. These are his words, not mine. If you're a patriotic Russian woman, you should have 8 children so that they can be sacrificed to Baal, right? So they can be thrown into the oven and churned up. It's staggering, right? And there will be other consequences you and I talked about. We'll touch on it in the program, I think. No army in history can ever be fed defeat after defeat after defeat after it. Just, they don't hold together. It isn't my guess of what might happen in the Ukraine-Russian war. It's happened throughout history. If you lead your men to Pyrrhic victories after Pyrrhic victories, they won't be an army much longer.
Well, we will take a look at that. They won't be an army much longer, but they need to be an army long enough in Kursk, which is the first place we're going to go on the zero line, in order to regain Russian territory. That also appears to be the place where they most need the help of these North Korean troops, apparently already deployed in Kursk. And before we get to the Kursk map, Chuck, won't the help of these North Korean combat soldiers serve to focus NATO once again on what Russia is doing?
Yeah, this is why I think this is probably going to be one of the biggest mistakes that Russia has made. And again, I tell the story all the time, and I'm happy to. I didn't think Putin would invade. I saw 20-mile-long convoys. I thought those were a blush. Nobody would have a 20-mile-long convoy. I thought an outright naked invasion of Ukraine will trigger an immediate domino effect of negative geopolitical consequences. Finland joining NATO, Sweden joining NATO, the Baltic Sea being closed to the Russians, on and on and on. Everything that Putin should have foresaw has happened. Highly negative consequences. This is going to be another staggering geopolitical mistake, to have North Korean troops enter into ground combat. However, let's frame this. There are already North Korean troops in combat in Ukraine, not just the ones that have converged on Kursk. It is North Korean missileers who are attacking Ukrainian cities. Ergo, they are in combat. Also remind everyone else, those Shahed drones come with their very own Iranian military advisors. Iran is also a combatant in Ukraine. But this is going to be, it's going to be another, whatever positive Putin foresees in having North Korean troops enter combat. This again, and this was one of the original consequences of invading, this is going to defibrillate NATO. It is going to put the spurs to arms shipments, training, and it's not impossible that we may see NATO enter the war. I don't think in ground combat, but I could certainly see something like a no-fly zone, which wouldn't be too good for the Russians.
I hope they revisit that possibility of imposing a no-fly zone over Ukraine. It's something that NATO can achieve. I noted that Romania is considering legislation, which would be required as a precondition here, but considering legislation that would free Romania to shoot down Russian drones and missiles that overfly Romanian airspace. That's a pretty important step for Romania to be taking.
It is, and remember Romania, as a former Soviet satellite, it has baggage, right? There's a history here, but there have been a number of airspace violations. And again, these are not accidental. These are not weapons that wandered over and strayed into Romania. These are calculated events violating Romanian airspace en route to Ukrainian targets. That's supposed to send a message. But there have also been cases where these drones, Shaheds, cruise missiles, a variety of those, a small number, have actually hit Romania and detonated. So, is Romania within its rights to protect its sovereign airspace? Well, I think they are.
Damn right they are. And Romania shares ports on the Danube River with Ukraine. The Danube is the border between the two countries. On one side of the river, there's a Romanian port. On the other side of the river, a Ukrainian port. And some of those Romanian port facilities have been struck by Russian drones, as I recall. This was many, many months ago.
Yeah, and the Danube remains one of the major trade corridors for all of Europe. It arguably is the Mississippi of Europe. That's how bulk goods are moved. So it isn't irrelevant that non-belligerent targets have been struck deliberately or by accident by the Russians. So again, these are the counterproductive kinds of moves that Putin is making. And what's so interesting to me is, in terms of informational warfare, Russia retains this elegant capability to influence the world, to twist stories, and they throw that all away with their military genius in chief making these staggeringly stupid decisions. There is no way to spin a North Korean combat intervention into something good. There's nothing good to be said about detonating weapons in Romania, and I also might add, Poland has not been immune from airspace violation.
Well, let's go to the map in Kursk and eventually get all the way along the zero line to Kherson. In Kursk, the Russians attempted something big to strike through the occupying Ukrainian forces and divide them. They failed.
Yeah, they did. So again, if you're not looking at the map, if you're listening to us, on the exercise bike, the Ukrainian salient into Kursk is oriented essentially north-south. It's kind of amoeba-shaped. The deepest penetration from the farthest south Russian frontier is about 40 kilometers. Ukraine still holds on to, give or take, and it's up a little north of 1,000 square kilometers. I'm also happy to point out they control more territory in Russia than Russia has gained all summer in Ukraine. The Russian effort was designed to nip off the upper portion of the Ukrainian salient. Russia sent, and wait for it, I know the tactical innovation will stun you, a daylight attack along a single axis of advance, attempting to capture the town of Malalok. And I may be misspelling that because my translator translated it into Small Chapel, which is the name of this little village. They sent in BMPs and a couple of pieces of armor. These vehicles were ambushed as they attacked, again, along a single line of advance, one paved road, surrounded to the north and south by Ukrainians who were waiting with a delicious series of ambushes and drone and artillery attacks. So we talk a lot about Russia generally fighting small. Before, the standard attack was platoon, sometimes company-sized. In the last couple of years of the war, we pointed out, in 90% of the time, the force packages they sent were not sufficient to achieve the objective. They weren't sending enough troops to do it. In this case, they did that again, even though the objective was so important. This might have succeeded. And if it had reached Malalok, it certainly, have they achieved a lodgment in that town, it would have been a very serious development. But again, a broad daylight attack on a single axis of attack with an insufficient force posture, and they were destroyed. Also, not just destroyed, but driven back. So right now, that road is blocked with Russian vehicles. The ambushes have been moved farther to the west. So this was a very significant, well, let's call it what it was, a defeat for Russia.
Do you think the North Korean troops, variously reported maybe 10,000, as many as 10,000 or 12,000, will they make a difference in Kursk?
I really don't know. Let's postulate what the average North Korean soldier is. He is a malnourished, undersized, thoroughly politically indoctrinated young man with an AK pattern rifle that dates from the 1950s. The corporate experience of his army is zero combat ground maneuver experience in the last 70 years. So almost a century with no combat experience. Zero combat experience in this rapidly changing 21st century battlefield. Zero experience. Well, let's just talk about this one guy. He has been told, certainly, that should he not comport himself with sufficient revolutionary zeal while deployed to Ukraine, his family will suffer. Killed, maybe. They have a 4-generation rule. If you screw up, your family's punished for 4 generations. I might suggest to our gentle readers that might not be the most effective soldier that you could bring onto the battlefield. So although they may appear in numbers, and although they may even be used in the manner they were used in their last combat engagement 70 years ago, mass frontal attacks, I'm not sure those are going to work out. I just really am not sure. Those kids are a long way from home. There is a language and cultural barrier, and they're being asked to die for something that's really pretty far out of their wheelhouse. And I think the troops realize that as well.
The only troops in the world who have experienced drone warfare and the the war zone in Ukraine is saturated with drones. The North Korean troops are entering this futuristic landscape they have no preparation for whatsoever.
And there will be a rapidly developing schism within this combined force. Combined is the war college term when you have forces from one nation and forces from another nation working together. That is a combined operation. We'll have to see what the North Korean forces are being used for. Russia is correct to have these people undergo some more modern military training. They are going to be correct in feeding them slowly into battle problems. They're going to have to work these guys up. And again, like I say, their field manuals, their conceptions of battlefields are based on the Korean War. And not to put too fine a point on it, look, 70 years ago. And in terms of technological growth in warfare in the last 70 years, come on, it's World War, the Korean War was basically the overtime for World War II. The world has changed. The world has changed. The world was astounded to see what happened in the first Desert Storm. That was astounding. It has moved on another order of magnitude from that. The battlefield has changed incredibly. And, I use this crack a lot, but soldiers are being hunted down by AI-equipped flying robots. That's a daily occurrence. They're not ready for it. They're just not.
And there are innovations that occur almost every day. These usually are brought to the world's attention by Ukrainians. And one that you brought to my attention, Chuck, was how Ukraine is now using drones to deliver magnetically fused mines to some key roadways in Kursk and elsewhere on the battlefield. What is Ukraine doing here?
Well, I like to think of myself as a out-of-the-box special warfare thinker, but my hat's off to the more superior minds that thought this up. What they've done is, before the world coined the term IED, improvised explosive device, there was a type of munition called an off-route mine, meaning it was a destructive device that was not put on a roadway or a trail, but adjacent to it. And its explosive composition was such that it exploded in a direction that covered the route, the highway, the trail you were going to cover. What the Ukrainians are now doing, and it's interesting because we just talked about the place that these mines debuted, and that was in Kursk along the 38H499 highway, which was the route in which the Russian failed offensive took place. In this deployment, a Ukrainian mine will find a highway that's used by Russian vehicles. It will land next to it and deposit an explosive device that will form a shaped projectile, explosively formed projectile that is aimed at the road. The drone takes off, and this mine sits there, and it has a magnetic fuse. So when a vehicle passes by, let's say your Miata, that isn't much of a magnetic signature. But when a great big truck passes by, made out of good old Soviet steel, the magnetic mine will actuate the explosive projectile, which will fly in and hit the vehicle. And again, you can sweep the route all you want because the mine isn't there. It's in the weeds. And I want people to imagine I've got an explosively formed projectile. I have covered it with Bondo and grass and newspaper and styrofoam rocks and everything else. It looks like roadside litter. And they're very effective.
And again, this is Ukraine developing a tactical surprise for Russian forces. And this is also part of the reason why Ukraine is inflicting such high casualties on the Russians. You know, we were talking about artillery as the cause of most casualties in this war or in any war. So you would actually expect the Ukrainian casualties to be much higher than they are, given the Russians' ability to outfire Ukraine. And you flip the table of statistics here. Obviously, Ukraine is not killing most Russians or wounding most Russians with its artillery fire. They don't have enough firepower to do it.
Yeah, and we've gone from, in terms of volume of fire, which doesn't necessarily indicate effective fire, but volume of fire is important. That's just the number of shells you put into the air every day. We've gone from situations on the battlefield where Ukraine was outfired 100 to 1. So for every artillery shell Ukraine sent, the Russians sent 100. That's gone up and down, but for brief periods this summer, and it may still extend into now, but I don't think so, that fell to 2 to 1. So Ukraine was firing 1 shell for every 2 fired by the Russians. But again, if I fire 100 shells at you and I miss everything, and you fire 1 shell back at me and it hits my counter battery radar, there you go. And that's pretty much what is going on. It has to, because Ukraine doesn't have the volume of fire. Therefore, it must hit what it's aiming at. And you're right. Normally, artillery is the number one weapon to kill people in war. And the principal arm of Russian ground maneuver warfare is and always has been, since the Napoleonic Wars, it is artillery. That's what they use. But you're right. Most of the casualties, Russian casualties, are not being affected by Ukrainian artillery. Instead, we see these massive Russian casualties because they continually attack prepared Ukrainian defensive positions. And that is always, you're going to have to pay the toll if you're doing that. And you want to put a stupid on that, you're going to pay more. If you attack in broad daylight, you're going to pay more if you're attacking on a single axis of attack. And God bless their little hearts, you're going to pay even more if you keep doing the same thing every day. And we're looking at Russian casualties approaching 2,000 a day. Not sustainable.
We're going to see that. 1680 just the other day, 4th highest casualty in a day. We are going to see the day and celebrate it when there are more than 2,000 Russian casualties in a given day. And they will be inflicted just as Ukraine has inflicted the 690,000 plus casualties to date in ambush, and in some cases, I'd have to say probably in close quarter fighting.
Absolutely, the close quarter fighting is always the test of how good your soldiers are. CQB, close quarters battle. That you've got a guy with 2 weeks of military training sent to the front, and now he finds himself in close proximity with a Ukrainian commando trained to the level of the SBS, the SAS, and the SEAL teams. There's only one way that's going to end, right? It's over. It's over. So the closer they get, quality of forces is also, it's vitally important.
Well, when we see video of Ukrainian forces clearing a Russian trench, for example, they do it methodically. Individual soldiers also conduct themselves with unbelievable bravery in these situations. I have seen videos that obviously are real, and seen individual Ukrainian soldiers do what to me is the unbelievable, Chuck.
And I watch those with a professional eye, and what I see is absolutely textbook execution. Absolutely textbook. And you get into the swirl of combat or any sort of life and death situation, and the only thing you have is your training. That's it. You fall back to that. There's a behavior in psychology, it's called subcortical thought, which means you're not using your gray matter, you're using your spinal cord. And it really comes down to that.
And that comes down to the training. The SAS and SBS, the services you're mentioning, Chuck, those are special air services and special boat services of the British military, I think, if I have my acronyms correct in my memory, which I don't always do.
Absolutely. Those are two of the premier special operations forces in the world. And even during my career, it continues through this day. NATO was always very good about putting all the special forces together. We all trained together. Where there were variations in tactics, every other NATO unit was happy if the Norwegians did something that was really effective. Well, that cross-pollinated to everyone else. If the SAS did a certain thing, that cross-pollinated to everyone else. So that although the tactics and training of these tier one units, they're not identical, they are complementary and homogenous. And, the proof is in the pudding. Budanov's boys knocked off 2 oil platforms in one night. Look, man, you can ride with me any day. That is a SEAL Team 6 level operation, and they've done it more than once. So that's the standard of training. And cut to, guy on the Russian subway gets picked up by the ear, sent to the police station, charged with, littering, and sent to the front. There is no equality in forces, right? There absolutely isn't.
I wonder when the Russian soldiers en masse are going to be so fed up that they will mutiny. I mean, whether it's the forces in Kursk, my God, what is going through their minds? They are now back in Russia fighting to regain Russian territory after being sent to Ukraine on a 3-day special military operation. Eventually they are going to have it, and they're going to turn their guns on their commanders.
Look, that is not just possible. It's becoming increasingly inevitable. So let's put this in sort of world context. Putin literally thought that taking down Ukraine, a nation the size of Texas, he thought this was going to be like the U.S. rolling on Grenada, right? He thought this was going to be over in 72 hours. He thought this would be like the U.S. rolling on Panama. Okay, what are we, 980 days into this? We're approaching 600,000 casualties. It isn't working. Could there be mutinies? Russia's most elite military organization, the VDV, and remember their paratroops are a separate branch of the service, distinct like the Marines. They've already threatened to mutiny, root and branch from Private Schmuckatelli to their leading generals. They have threatened to mutiny. And people shrug their shoulders. Look, what if the Marine Corps said we're not fighting anymore? That's it. We've had it. And the one general that those men rallied around disappeared. He's gone. Nobody knows where he was because he said, my troops are not being supported well enough. My troops are being wasted in bad employments with bad objectives, with insufficient force, with insufficient artillery. General Popov, I believe his name was he right? Well, when we get down to Kherson, we'll talk about a little town there that a division of Russian paratroopers still hasn't taken. So I think he's right.
And we are going to move down along the zero line from Kursk to Kupiansk. In Kupiansk, again, Russian superiority on the battlefield, but showing some possibility of moving north of Kupiansk, which is exactly what they need to do. But I don't know if they have achieved this swing around the north of Kupiansk or not, Chuck.
Yeah. So if you're looking at the map, we'll be talking about the area to the east of the P79 highway and north of the H26. If you don't have a map, imagine a kind of red mitten reaching out at the city of Kupiansk. Sinkivka is a little village to the northeast of Kupiansk, and it has been the center and continues to be the center of a lot of conflict there. What the Russians appear to have done in the last 36 hours, they appear to have crossed the Oskil River north of Kupiansk, and they have a small lodgment to the west of the river. That looks great in your reports to Moscow. Don't include the topographic map because it says we have crossed a river and are now facing down a very steep hillside upon which the enemy is firmly seated. And Alan and I were joking before the show. The good news is we've crossed the river. The bad news is we're on low ground overlooked by a dug-in enemy who is probably going to send us a shovel so the last guy can bury everybody. That being what it is, as Alan said, this is actually a move that makes military sense for the Russians. The way to take a city is not the Russian way. You don't tooth and nail and fight yourself into a suburb and hold on at great cost and try to expand your zone of control one building at a time. That's not what a Western army would do because it costs too much. What the Russians want, perhaps, I can't even tell what they want because they do stupid things, but what you want to do is you want to envelop a city, cut it off, and besiege it. That's the most cost-efficient way to do that. However, that requires complex and coordinated military evolutions, right? It requires your forces to converge on an objective. That's something Russia hasn't shown itself at being very good at. The other thing, and if you do have the topo map, zero it in on that blue arrow that I've shown and look closely at the topographic lines. It means that even if the Russians continue on towards the M79 highway or the P79, there's hillsides that they are going to have to fight their way up to approach Kupiansk. And remember, your forces are like a blow-in, a plug-in lawnmower, right? You've got to plug it into the house and you've got to protect the cord. Their supply lines, they're going to have to cross the Oskil River. All their troops need beans, bullets, and Band-Aids, and they've got to get there. So I don't see this as a successful operation, but for once I can tell you the Russians are actually trying to do something that makes sense.
Well, when you look at this map from Kupiansk and do take a close look, as Chuck suggests, at the topographical features, there's high ground directly east of Kupiansk in Petropavlivka, which is probably a Ukrainian fortress at this moment in time.
Yeah, and as we look at the H26 highway goes through Kupiansk and heads east. I just, in this map that we just put up, readjusted the zero line. You can see the highway goes south and then east from Petropavlivka. The Ukrainians have conducted a series of raids towards Pishkane. They have pushed down the H-26. That zero line has gone back and forth by 4 or 5 kilometers at a time. There's also some unique topographical conditions in the city of Kupiansk itself, which has 2 sections. The eastern section of Kupiansk, on the east bank of the Oskil River, there are forests and hills and an addition of complex urban terrain, kind of an interesting place where you've actually got forest butting up right against, I've been in a couple cities in New England that are like that. There's woods, no suburbs, there's just woods right there. And the western side of Kupiansk, across the Oskil River, there is a bluff that is, I wouldn't want to run up it on a daily run. It's got 5 or 6 or 7 contour lines in it. So Kupiansk is going to be a very, very tough nut for the Russians to crack. But they're trying. But they are
trying. And somewhat skillfully. But Kupiansk is especially the kind of place where once the fall rains begin, or if we go through a dry autumn in Ukraine, as we have so far, and winter arrives, the weather conditions, in a way, become an additional protector of Kupiansk, in addition to the Ukrainian forces there doing the fighting. The weather helps them in their defense.
Yep, it absolutely does, because you are in a static defensive position. You don't have to maneuver, right? You don't have to move your troops. All you need to do is move your logistics. If you are the attacker, you have to move your troops and you have to move your logistics, and you have to extend your logistics. And, just any listener, when you've got a nice walk in the woods you like to do, you know what happens to that in the fall, right? The trail and all the bike riders and all the people, they turn it into mush. And then as the winter comes, and it is coming, it's below freezing now at night. The worst part of it all for me is when the mud footprints and tracks, they all freeze into that jagged bunch of nonsense. The other thing that we're going to see, Alan, coming up is weather becoming a factor. And that famous SEAL expression, travel light, freeze at night, which means who's ever got the better gear is going to be able to get through those winter nights. We're going to start seeing Russian soldiers who we know are not fed well. We know they are not provided with any sort of medical care, let alone prophylaxis and injections and flu shots. They're going to suffer this winter and they're going to die. 3 hours without shelter. You have inadequate clothing, and it is, as it easily can be, 10 below zero in Ukraine. How are you going to do? How are you going to do with those boots made by the lowest bidder? It's going, General Winter, as he has every winter, is going to be killing Russians. Whoever's dug in the nice warm dugout, they're going to have a nice winter.
And we've seen some video tours of the Ukrainian positions, actually in Kursk itself, where Ukraine has clearly prepared to stay all winter long, and I think they will. What the Russians are attempting to do at the moment, it seems to me, Chuck, is to get to the lines they want to establish before winter arrives, which is why they are feeding so many soldiers into these assaults pretty much all along the zero line.
Yeah, this is Russia wanting to lock in their gains, and I would say hunker down for the winter. Interestingly enough, there's two things you can do. You can keep pressing forward your attacks and devote all of your energy, logistical planning, labor, manpower allocations, material to the attack, or you can reduce your attacks and you can start exerting some of that labor into winter quarters, right? The Russians are in attack mode right now. They are not digging in. They are not looking forward to the winter. And looking forward to this, folks, you're going to see Ukrainian positions with the Christmas lights on and a gas stove and a guy making latkes, and those are winter quarters. You're also going to see, when you look at those positions, you see zigzagging trenches dug correctly. So that if a grenade lands in one sector of the trench, the shrapnel doesn't fly down the whole position. These are, there was a military occupational specialty called combat engineering. It's digging these emplacements that are so important. It's one of the reasons why Russian casualties go up. They're attacking prepared defensive positions, which don't just have cover, they have concealment, and more importantly, interlocking fields of fire. So I run up going, for Putin and the motherland, and I'm not getting shot at by my opposite number. I'm getting shot at by everybody in intersecting fire, what would be called a crossfire, but more deadly by far, plunging fire. So machine gun back far enough so that its bullets come at me like this. They plunge straight down. And that is a murderous thing to get through.
That's why the high ground where the Ukrainians are in Kupiansk is so important. And yes, Russia is trying to lock in its gains of the past summer, which have been incremental. That would be, I think, the best way possibly to describe them. But another way is to think about what Russia hasn't gained. Russia wants all of Luhansk, all of Donetsk, all of Zaporizhia, all of Kherson. They haven't gotten anywhere close to that. They wanted to take Ukraine's second city, Kharkiv, and they failed in that attempt. They desperately want to get to Liman. I don't see them getting there. They desperately want to be fighting on the outskirts of Zaporizhia city. I don't think we're going to see that before winter arrives, Chuck.
No, I don't. And let's pull back up to the National Command Authority level. Again, I want to remind people, put yourself in Putin's shoes and you tell me what the plan is. How are you going to win this war? Tell me. Operation Overlord, you got Romelsky just came up from Command and Staff College. He's going to take over and he's going to launch a multi-pronged attack that will take Kyiv, Zaporizhia, and then drive the Ukrainian forces to the Polish border. There is no plan. That is aspirational. It is unachievable. They don't have a plan to win this war. They don't have the means by which to do it. They don't have the quality of troops. They don't have the quality of material. And principally for me, as a small unit guy, they don't have the leadership, which is this magic thing. It's ineffable. You can look at the great generals of history and see that magic work, but it can't be exported, right? Alexander the Great, if you lead your men to victory after victory after victory, they will eat fire for you. They will follow you to the ends of the earth. If you feed them a steady diet of defeat and brutality from the top, like the Civil War General Bragg, your men will turn on you. And as they did in Chattanooga, they will abandon mountainous positions where the enemy had to go 1,000 feet up in the air, and they all ran away. That's the difference between General Grant's leadership and the leadership of a martinet megalomaniac. That's the difference. No one can tell me the name of one effective, relevant Putin general. There are none. They're mafia dons. They're not flag officers. They're in on the grift. This winter, the average Russian soldier might be asking, where are the million parkas and winter boots that disappeared from a warehouse in Siberia? Where are they? Good question, Ivan. Here, you want a marshmallow for your hot cocoa? Oh, you don't have any hot cocoa? Sucks to be you, dude.
Well, that is the preview of winter that the Russian forces are going to face in Ukraine, as well as in Kursk. So we're going to leave Kupiansk for the moment, Chuck, and go to Vuhledar. It was in Vuhledar a couple of weeks ago that we saw that massive artillery barrage early morning in preparation for what turned out to be the final Russian assault through Vuhledar. Ukrainian troops pulled out. Russia continues to advance, but at a heavy price. Let's take a look at the map in Vuhledar and remind our viewers, yes, there's some Russian success here at tremendous casualties, but where are they headed?
Yeah, I will be coming up with the new map projection here in Vuhledar, so we can see what is actually happening. The Russians are finally conducting an attack, well, attempting to conduct a converging attack. So at great cost, and after 32 months, they were able to take Vuhledar. They are now closing in on Bohdemvinka and also Shatarsky in the west. And let's go over to the left side of the map and talk about Shatarsky. Russian attacks are based in Zoltaniva, and they are heading north. They have actually gotten a lodgment in the southeast corner of Shatarsky, but over the last 2 days, they have lost 20 armored vehicles, tanks at a time. Again, these attacks are rectilinear, perpendicular to the zero line, in column, where every Ukrainian gun can shoot at the Russian column, and only the lead vehicle can shoot back. Why they keep conducting these attacks, Alan, it's staggering. Again, but manpower it doesn't matter to a Russian general how many people he loses. It is utterly irrelevant. He doesn't care if he squanders a battalion, 1,000 men to take 50 yards. He doesn't care. He's not going to get relieved. He's going to get a pat on the head, and he's going to get another frying pan to stick on his uniform. It is a significant advance that the Russians have actually registered lodgements in Shatarsky. Okay, now we're moving to the right. Novoukrainia, there, the Russians have pushed up the CO5 1133, and they are on the fringes of Novoukrainia as well. Okay, now we go back and we're north of Vuhledar. Bohdemvinka, a little town the Russians have pushed again at great cost and have registered slight lodgements in there as well. Now, I will get a bigger map up so people can see what's in play here. What the Russians are doing is finally making a pincher attack, right? What you want to do generally in ground maneuver warfare is converge behind your enemy, right? So are they going to be able to do this? I don't know. Are they trying? Yeah. Is it the smart tactical thing to do? It is. But again, look at all that open terrain, see those little green lines. Those are the only means by which you can maneuver on this battle line. You have to move in those little tree breaks. Everything else in the open is going to eat a drone. So this battlefield is a little bit more complex and a little bit more limited, actually, than it looks. But again, the onus is on who's ever conducting offensive operations. They have to move their men, their material, and they have to extend their ground lines of communication. If I'm waiting every morning with a fixed bayonet in the same place the Russians attack every morning, I mean, that's why we're looking at 1,600 casualties in a single day.
I mean, again, the Russian style of attack is simply grinding forward at all costs. And in this case, the fourth highest number of casualties in a single day for the Russians. Those tree lines, which are essentially windbreaks planted between farming fields in many cases. Those tree lines, if they haven't been shattered by artillery already and splintered, will very soon be bare of leaves and foliage. They won't offer the same kind of concealment in just a few more weeks that they have offered all summer long.
Yeah, right. And, one of the fatal lessons that a young soldier can learn on the battlefield is the difference between concealment and cover, right? If I jump in your hedges, I have concealment. If you spray the hedges with your machine gun, I will discover very quickly that that was not cover. So, we'll have to see. The other thing that is going on here, let's say, and I will need the next time we discuss this, I'm going to have a map that will more easily lend itself to explanations. But right now, if Bohdyanivka, Nova Ukraina, and Shatarsky should all fall, you look behind them and there are no north-south roads, right? If they were to take all three of these towns and push the zero line and push the red all the way up into a line that goes east-west from Shatarsky to Nova Ukraina and to Bohdyanivka, so what? Again, as we've said so many times, Russia throws incredible numbers of troops. They roll big money in a penny ante game. So they are willing to lose, in this case, tens of thousands of men to achieve what? Okay, I'm going to give them their maximum victory. They've taken Shatarsky, they've taken Nova Ukraina, and they've taken Bohdyanivka. Now what? Onward to Kyiv? There isn't even a road that goes to the north. This is a pointless vector of attack. And again, so the mid to upper management of the Russian military, what's the point? What is the point here? I don't know. This is like the Battle of Bakhmut. 40, 50, 60,000 Russian dead. They took Bakhmut, but as we said 3 years ago, Alan, the money shot was Chasiv Yar, not Bakhmut. And again and again.
Chasiv Yar still holds, Chuck.
To this day. But you know what? You and I never were on the record saying, oh my God, Chasiv Yar is going to fall, because we can read a topographical map. There's a reason why it still hasn't fallen, and it's topography. It's tactical relevance. These three towns in play here, look, there isn't even a north-going road. look, you give me 60,000 Russian dead to squander, and I think I could put together a more cogent, a more relevant place to apply them on the battlefield than here. I'm just saying.
Well, we do have to keep our eyes on what's happening north and west of Vuhledar, but and when we have that larger scale map, viewers will see. I mean, there is no place really to go. There are no serious objectives for the Russians to identify, unlike the cities of Kharkiv, Liman, Kupiansk, Zaporizhia, or Kiev for that matter.
Pokrovsk as well. There are places where they should be fighting and places where they shouldn't be fighting. But again, I'm a colonel, I'm a brigadier, I'm a major general serving in Ukraine. All that Putin wants to hear from me is that I'm attacking daily. That's all he wants to hear. He doesn't want to hear, and will never get a plan. Hey, look, I think we do this, and we can. He doesn't want to hear it. He just doesn't want to hear it. The cynical thing about this, and the, it's actually breathtaking. The squandering of manpower. Even speaking cynically, were I a Nazi general, manpower is a resource, right? A trained soldier, one trained soldier is worth 20 civilians, right? In terms of battlefield effectiveness. This just isn't, this is like putting $500 into a slot machine, right? The payoff is not, it isn't going to be worth it. And it isn't in this case. But we'll see. I will also say, and look, and tell you the truth, these are, these are significant developments. This isn't good news, right? But we see what's the worst case. They take these 3 towns and good on them. So we'll see.
Those 3 places would become winter quarters for the Russians. But of course, there won't be anything left of them. Just as there's nothing left of Vuhledar, completely destroyed. There really is nothing left of Bakhmut. Chasiv Yar itself has been pounded into rubble by artillery and glide bombs. So winter quarters in such rebelized cities are hard to create and hard to live in.
Yeah, exactly. And having slept in both burned out buildings and snug defensive positions, drive by a derelict building in Cleveland, look in there and see if you could find a warm place to sleep in the winter. You can't. So we'll see. But again, it's endemic. It's baked into the Russian military that the casualties of their men, they don't matter at all. Okay, the bad thing is mass has a quality on the battlefield. You keep up these grinding attacks, but people, civilians, and our listeners don't lose sight of the fact that morale, the internal cohesiveness of your unit and its combat effectiveness, that's like the Trinity. Those circles overlap in a Venn diagram, the overlapping positions, that is combat effectiveness. You cannot lead your men to contact every day where you're losing 60, 70, 80% of the assault force every single day. And then you cannot put a flag up, as they did on the kindergarten in Bodemvinka, and say, look at our glorious achievement. Your soldiers are going to say, where's Fred? Where's Bob? Where's Mike? Where's everyone else in my company? I'm the only survivor. It looks good in Moscow, but it doesn't play well in the barracks, Alan. And the diminishment of their combat effectiveness shows. It truly does. Put together a multi-company level assault, they lose 20 vehicles in the space of an hour and a half. That's not, as Charlie Sheen says, That ain't what winning looks like.
Well, it's the Russian soldier who arrived 979 days ago, if he is still alive, would have a lot of battlefield experience on the Russian side, but it would avail him nothing because his commander will use him in exactly the same way as he uses the newly arrived recruit. Go forward, don't come back until you've achieved your objective. And, there are some very experienced Russian soldiers who have found a way to get through this war. And they're the most valuable men on the Russian side. I would want to use them a little bit more respectfully.
Yeah, absolutely. And they are a precious resource. But the Russian army isn't configured where you've got a Sergeant Rock. The United States Army and the NATO armies, the NCOs and your senior NCOs in the company, the battalion, and keep going, they are the skeleton and the nervous system that keep the troops together. It's the platoon sergeant that's going to look out for these new guys, give them a swim buddy, and you take him under your wing. That just doesn't happen in the Russian army. In fact, the NCOs get together, beat up the new arrivals, possibly rape them, but take all their gear. Intro to the Russian army. So, and look, there are some effective Russian units. I'm not saying there aren't, but their combat effectiveness, it's abysmal. There are some good Russian soldiers. That's all I'm saying. But fighting on your own hook doesn't win a battle. And if you've got a division of paratroopers and they can't take Kozachi Liri, there's a problem. I've said this a million times. How you pay the 82nd Airborne, so do I with our taxes. How long do you think it's going to take the 82nd Airborne to take a 3-street village? 2 years?
Less than a minute.
Than a minute. I don't even want to call me back when you won the war. Yeah.
Well, Kozachi Lahari is that tiny riverside village just on the edge of the Dnipro River, upriver from Kherson, and that is the next map we're going to take a look at. What's interesting at this point in the war, Chuck, is how long now Russian forces have more or less been pinned here by Ukrainian forces on the other side of the Dnipro River and engaged from time to time with cross-river raiding. I don't think the Ukrainians really have established a beachhead on the south bank of the Dnipro, but this is pretty far from the main arena of action.
Well, and again, in this particular place, if you're looking at the map and go over to the left side, you can see the town of Oleshki, and there to the southwest of Oleshki is very likely one of the most important crossroads in the entire war, a place of incredible tactical significance, and that is the junction of the M14 and the M17 highway. You drive south on the M17, next stop Crimea. So this is an important place to be. And it is a place where Ukraine has forced Russia to employ a significant body of their forces and resources are in this section of the war. If you are a Russian soldier, and I hope you're listening, and good luck this afternoon, if you are to the west of Melitopol and to the south of Kherson, you might as well be on Mars, right? You're not putting your bayonet to use, killing Ukrainians. You're not advancing the ball. You are sucked into a sideshow of this war. But Russia dare not diminish their forces here. These guys are a sunk cost, because one of the things that happened, as we know, a couple of years ago now, the Russians blew the dam at Novokharkovka. It flooded out tens of thousands, perhaps 100,000 people. But what they also did is they reduced all of the reservoirs, the river itself. By blowing that dam, it created dozens, if not hundreds, of possible crossing places for Ukrainian forces. Russia has to keep troops here to prevent a crossing in force across the Dnipro by the Ukrainian forces. One day, without fail, they will cross the Dnipro. That is absolutely going to happen. When it's going to happen, the Russians don't know, and they've got to keep tens of thousands of men in Kherson Oblast. And that's good. So the Ukrainian force in being here, that's what it's there for. This is a positional fight. But we'll see. One day we're going to be reporting Ukrainian progress down the M17 highway. I absolutely promise you that's going to happen.
Well, when that happens, it will be a great relief to the Ukrainians left in Kherson city itself. What Russia does primarily in Kherson is track down civilians going about their daily lives and making them the victims of Russian drones that are attacking cars, buses, trucks, attacking pedestrians. If you are doing anything in Kherson and hear the little whir of a drone above you, you do need to find cover like that.
Yeah, it's truly obscene. And a mother pushing a baby carriage, an ambulance loading wounded people, an old woman coming home with a shopping bag. Don't take my word for it, but I don't encourage you to look for those videos because they're there in their dozens. Kherson gets happy shots every day from Russian artillery, but the most obscene fact is, just as you say, Alan, it's Russian drone operators gleefully hunting down civilians on the streets of this town. It's about as sick as it can be.
It is sick, and it is basically sport to those Russian drone operators. That's clearly how they treat it. Kherson, like Kharkiv, all the way at the other side of Ukraine, does face artillery fire every single day. I think it's Kharkiv, though, that is coming under increased attack by glide bombs. Just overnight, a Russian glide bomb struck a residential apartment tower in Kharkiv. There were at least 21 wounded. But these Russian attacks occur every single day, every single night. Sometimes it's overnight that the glide bombs do their worst damage. And both in Kherson and in Kharkiv, the Russians conduct what is called a double tap strike. And again, this, to me, it is obscene. The Russians give first responders sufficient time to get to the fire and start to put it out, or to get to the rubble and start to pull survivors from the building. But then the Russians strike it again, trying to kill the first responders.
Well, this is something that they learned and perfected in Syria, where virtually every hospital in Syria has been destroyed deliberately by Russian precision strike munitions. And we are so used to saying that glide bombs in Kharkiv hit an apartment building. I want everyone to remember this. That is not a weapon that went astray trying to interdict a Ukrainian military target, right? This is not something that wandered off course. Before this weapon was hooked up to the outer pylon of a Russian strike fighter, the coordinates were dialed in, an 8-digit grid coordinate of an apartment building, right? This was not accidentally selected by a Russian pilot in the air. It was not because his laser designator was off. These are deliberate strikes against high-density civilian population centers. And they have done it again, not just again and again. If you've got a Russian precision strike munition and it's in the air, there's a 95% chance that it is targeting civilians. 95% of their weapons, cruise missiles, air-launched cruise missiles, glide bombs, precision strike artillery, that's who they're hitting. That's it. That's who we're fighting, are these guys. This is a binary moral structure, right? There is the forces of darkness and there is the side of the angels. And there is no other way to assess this. So again, that sergeant programming in that weapon, that's a war crime. That pilot who flies up, pickles the target, releases that bomb, that is a war crime. The targeteers who put this together, that is a war crime. You flying your drone and killing a little old lady with a plastic bag full of groceries, you know what that is. If you aim at her, if you shoot her, if you can't do anything to a non-combatant female. There is no circumstance in war where that is ever justified. So it does get me a little rattled up a little bit there, Alan.
Well, I hope it gets NATO rattled up too. The arrival of North Korean troops really should focus NATO's attention once again on the war in Europe that Russia has launched. But I don't think anything is really going to happen in terms of what NATO will or won't do until after the coming presidential election in the United States. We're just a week away from that. And while Russia has no plan to win the war, I think that they have some hopes that a Trump victory would give them an out. If Trump and Mike Johnson and Republican senators are all in control of the government, I think there's a very good chance that continued aid to Ukraine would be stopped after next January 20th.
I think you have a legitimate concern, but there's just something in my head that wants to believe that there is still someone in the national security apparatus of the United States that recognizes what Russia is to NATO and the West. We are, when you deal with Russian intelligence and you read it, we are what they call, we are their perennial enemy. Their words, not mine. I do not see how any person in the national security apparatus could think that a Russian triumph in Ukraine is going to be good for the stability of NATO. It won't be. And furthermore, I can't imagine anyone in the national security apparatus, where I was a worker bee, that doesn't realize that the goal of this war has to be the destruction of the Russian army. We have to take the machete away from this crazy man, right? He can bloviate all he wants to, but if he doesn't have an army that works, he won't be able to invade Chechnya, invade Georgia, conduct crazy stuff in Moldova. He wants the Baltics back. We can fight this in Ukraine, or we can fight it on the streets of Tananit, right? That's a NATO country. When they invade Estonia, which they are likely to do, and certainly given the circumstances of a triumph in Ukraine, of course they would.
Yeah.
Then we're in a shooting war. Ukraine is not asking for the Marines. They don't want paratroopers. They don't want the first armored division, the big red one. They don't want anything. Good job. And I actually think, Alan, Putin is going to make that mistake. He is going to put North Korean troops into ground combat. And that's going to have immediate geopolitical consequences for him. And they are going to be highly negative for his plans on dominating Ukraine.
10 to 12,000 North Korean troops fighting in Ukraine. That's just a trickle of new forces, but it could well become a stream of North Korean troops helping Russia, because Russia needs that much help if they are going to continue this grinding assault on Ukrainian positions.
And let's put it into perspective a little bit here. 10,000 North Korean troops enter combat here. They could be burned up in 10 days.
Yeah.
10 days. And we talked about the initial invaders. If there are any listening, please, drop a comment and a like for us. 400,000 troops invaded Ukraine. Now that 600,000 of them are dead. That is certainly more than 1-to-1, and I'm sure there's some KG veterans right now who actually survived, but there aren't many of them, Alan.
There aren't many. And they have survived. 10,000 troops from North Korea doesn't represent a huge investment. That army in North Korea, it's one of the largest armies in the world, 1.5 million soldiers, roughly. So they're not going to miss those 10,000 North Korean troops. But it is quite a pool of manpower for Putin to be able to draw from. They wouldn't miss 100,000. They probably wouldn't miss 250,000. And Putin would need every single one of them to accomplish his 3-day task.
Yeah. And I have a hunch, and my position has evolved. 3 weeks ago, I didn't think that North Korean forces were likely to enter ground maneuver combat. I saw them being used in non-combat tasks, essential non-combat tasks. I saw the employment of their special operations forces, of which 1,500, so a battalion of very capable North Korean special operations forces. I saw them being employed. But I'm looking at it now, and I would say it is highly likely that North Korea will enter into ground combat. And let's remember, 10,000 troops, that's about 2 weeks casualties. The thing to worry about is 20, 30, 40, 50. And you're right, Alan, 200,000 would be a sustainable loss for Rocket Man, especially with what he's going to get in return. He's going to get help with his ballistic missile programs. He's going to get help with intercontinental ballistic missiles, which he does not yet have. He's going to get his Air Force modernized. You can just imagine the goodies that lunatic wants.
Well, Chuck and I will be back this week with additional maps and with some updated maps from Vuhledar, from Kursk, and from Kupiansk. Quite likely, we'll take a look at Kremna as well. For today, this has been Indications and Warnings with Chuck Farrer. Please subscribe to the Information Warfare Initiative on YouTube. When you subscribe to that and subscribe to Indications and Warnings, you'll be notified whenever a new show goes up, whenever new maps go up. If you want to have the map in front of you while listening to Chuck's analysis, follow Chuck on Twitter, download those maps, and you can blow them up as large as you want on your computer screen and understand the topography that so often dictates how Ukraine chooses to defend a city like Kupiansk, for example. I think that would be a great map to look at as large as possible on your computer screen.
Yeah, it's Napoleon who said that geography is destiny. And unfortunately, Ukraine has decided that it is in the worst neighborhood in the whole world. But please do. I never thought I would ever say like, follow, and subscribe. Follow Alan as well. And we're here to win it, folks. We're here to help you dominate your own information microcosm. We're going to help you win at Thanksgiving dinner, which is the rehearsal for the full-blown psychosis of the holidays. So please do join us. We love to have you on board, and tell your friends. But Alan, thank you for another great show. And folks, we do this a couple times a week. So please do join us and tell everybody.
Thank you, Chuck, and Slava Ukraini.
Herojam Slava.